We've talked a couple times now about the $43 billion offer that Elon Musk made to buy Twitter. Of course, some of it is just that Musk is one of the world's most interesting people. He's the richest person, at least for now. He's a businessman with some real success. Tesla is worth $1 trillion, according to the stock market. That's more than GM and Ford and Chrysler combined, if you're counting. Now, you may not think that's right, but millions of investors seem to. So he's not just a businessman. He's a bit of a mad scientist, too, not just his electric cars idea, but his spaceships idea. He has a company called the Boring Company that's about tunneling underground for cars, hence the word boring. It's a double entendre. He's cheeky. He's a bit of a mad scientist. He made flamethrowers and sold them. I'm not sure why, but he did. He's a bit of a pundit, a bit of a philosopher. He seems to love pot. He smokes it while talking for hours with podcasters like Joe Rogan. He meets with the comedy writers of the Babylon Bee. I think they're the funniest conservative website around. So, of course, Elon Musk himself is fun to talk about. I'm sure the fact that I'm obviously addicted to Twitter personally makes me more interested than a normal person would be who isn't on Twitter. But that's the thing. Who is on Twitter? It's big, but it's not that big. I mean, it has 400 million users, so sure, that's enormous. But Facebook has, 2 billion users? TikTok and Instagram have more than 1 billion. Twitter doesn't make a lot of money. And it's not really growing that quickly either. So why is it so important? Why are people fighting over it? Because the number one reason users say they have Twitter is to get the news. Yeah, sports, comedy, celebrities, entertainment, of course, that's important too. But Twitter is about the news. It's about politics. More importantly, maybe more accurately, it's about news makers and news creators and news writers and news editors, news shapers. If you're a billionaire, you can go and buy yourself a newspaper, even buy yourself a TV news station. Now, Elon Musk probably could, but if you have Twitter, and by that, if you control it, well, you sort of have every news network in your hand because they all use Twitter to propagate stories and videos. More importantly, all the journalists are on Twitter. They're hooked on Twitter. They're obsessed with Twitter, checking Twitter always. It's the clubhouse for journalists. It's where PR companies live. It's the public square, the town square. Twitter calls itself that. So sure, it has a financial value, but its value is much deeper than that. It's the bulletin board that every political and media person in the world uses, not just Americans, but Canadians, the Chinese, the Russians, the Ukrainians, the Iranians, everyone. Now, you can't use Twitter itself in China or Iran, but the Chinese and Iranian dictators use Twitter. You see my point? That's their value that they place on it. And Twitter's top hashtag last year, that means a little tagline that users type out on the stories to help people searching find them, was COVID-19. Are you getting it? Let's say you wanted to control the entire national discussion, actually the global discussion. Say you wanted to talk about Ukraine and Russia. Not just in English, but in many other languages. You could try and buy newspapers in every country, TV stations, whatever. But why not just own the public square, own the meeting place, own the medium that they all use, and then subtly build in a few filters, call them algorithms. Pump up the voices you want promoted, boost them, show them to more people, and do the opposite to voices you don't want seen, demote them, show them to fewer people, put warnings on the accounts of people you don't like, ban them even, which is exactly what Twitter has done. And that's what they say they've done. Their new CEO, Parag Agrawal, famously said they're not so much interested in free speech, but rather deciding who gets attention to their speech. So everyone can shout into the wind, but only Agrawal's friends will have their shouts heard by anyone. So if you're Pfizer and Moderna, that's extremely valuable. You need to boost tweets that promote vaccines. You need to de-boost, throttle tweets that are skeptical. Call that misinformation, even if it later turns out that they were right. Now, normally it's subtle. You might not even notice it. Sometimes it's just too much not to notice, like when they literally suspended a sitting president of the United States, or when they suspended the mighty New York Post, one of America's oldest newspapers, for posting a completely true story about Hunter Biden's laptop just before the election. What's the value of that? If that censorship moved the needle a couple of percent in the election, did they lose it for Trump and win it for Biden? What's the value of that? It's got to be trillions. Think about what China or Russia or, frankly, Pfizer or Moderna would do for that kind of control over the discourse. There was no war for 4 years under Donald Trump. You know that? I mean, he didn't invade anybody. He lobbed a few missiles at Syria for effect, but he started no new wars. Russia and North Korea were pacified during that time, too. In fact, Trump made peace between the Jews and the Arabs. I wonder if any, arms dealers wanted Trump gone. I wonder what the value of owning Twitter, the massive censorship machine, would be to them. That's what Twitter is. It's a filter. It's a subtle censor. And do you doubt that they compile everything you look at, every message you send? Don't doubt it. It's in their terms of service. It's their business model. So imagine everything that every politician and every journalist writes and reads being owned by Twitter. But more than that, Twitter has private messages you can send people that the public doesn't see. They're called DMs, direct messages. Do you doubt that Twitter staff read those secret messages between politicians, journalists, diplomats, etc.? I've had some pretty frank discussions with sitting politicians over Twitter direct messages, sensitive for them, maybe for me too, I don't know. But do you doubt they're being read by Twitter's left-wing staff? Again, let me disabuse you of your naivete if you do doubt it. Look at this story from the Washington Post, no less. Former Twitter employees charged with spying for Saudi Arabia by digging into the accounts of kingdom critics. Well, there it is. And it just so happens that Prince Al Walid of Saudi Arabia is one of the largest investors at Twitter, has been for a while. He says, "I don't believe that the proposed offer by Elon Musk comes close to the intrinsic value of Twitter given its growth prospects. Being one of the largest and long-term shareholders of Twitter, Kingdom HC and I reject this offer." Now, here's Elon Musk's reply to the Saudi prince. He says, "Interesting. Just two questions, if I may. How much of Twitter does the kingdom own directly and indirectly? What are the kingdom's views on journalistic freedom of speech?" Elon Musk is right. He's pointing out that a foreign prince of a dictatorship is calling the shots at an American company. But his second point, while spicy, isn't quite right. I don't think the main value to the Saudi regime of owning Twitter is spying on domestic political activists. Of course, that's part of it, for sure. But Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Twitter ownership can spy on everyone in the world, on the West. Spy and throttle or boost, tweak the algorithms to show people more of what the owners want them to see and less of what the owners don't want them to see. It's sort of obvious. If you're using a free service like Facebook or Twitter, it's because you're the product that's being bought and sold. That's an excerpt from my daily show, the Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.